Kanchan Gupta, Senior Advisor in Ministry of Information and Broadcasting, is joining me live. Kanchan Gupta, really appreciate your time. Do you see this series of documentary as the Vice President highlights, some kind of information warfare?
Well, the fact is that the emergent new information order, which replaces the earlier order, is largely based on narrative building and manipulating global affairs through narratives. And a big part of that narrative building is the disinformation campaign that happens again and again, and of which this country is also a victim. So I would sort of place BBC in that category of one of the many instruments of disinformation, dissemination, and they do it with a certain degree of finesse so that it looks like some great news or current affairs program. But it is not as innocent as it seems to be.
Okay.
So that's how I would put it.
Okay. Mr. Kanchan Gupta, BBC is a state broadcaster. Is there a need for a diplomatic outreach to the British government over such content?
Well, the British Broadcasting Corporation is Britain's state broadcaster, public broadcaster. It is funded by tax money of Britain. And it operates under a royal charter. But the British government itself keeps on insisting that it is an independent organization and they have no neither control nor they just don't have any control over it. So to reach out to the British government over this, I doubt if that would be much useful. But Maria, you must keep in mind that here in India, BBC operates as a registered foreign company. I don't know how many of you know that there are two entities. One is the BBC World. World is within parenthesis, BBC World India Private Limited. And the subsidiary of that is BBC Global News India Private Limited. So we are not dealing with news outfit, Qua News outfit, but we are dealing with registered foreign companies over here. And the ongoing tax surveys have to be seen in that context.
Yes, that brings me to my next question about the tax surveys. Because the tax surveys are continuing to happen, the opposition says, if anything, this is an example of the government muzzling press. There has been a press release that has been put out by the Press Council of India as well. How is the government viewing it? Particularly because, if this is the reaction that is coming, the chain of events is being built that you may say that it has nothing to do with the editorial decision vis-a-vis the BBC documentary, but the fact that these surveys, which are being seen as raids, are happening at this time, it obviously is linked to their editorial policy.
Maria, you are welcome to sort of believe that the two are linked. But I would only try to disabuse your mind as well as the minds of your viewers that there is absolutely no link between BBC's editorial output and the income tax department's surveys. There is no link. The BBC has been served with several notices preceding the telecast of its so-called two-part documentary, and the survey follows those notices because the BBC has either not been able to come up with convincing responses, or they have refused or decided not to respond. So, the two, to sort of interlink the two would not be a very fair approach. As far as statements being issued by various organizations, they are welcome to do that. But I would just point out that when Arnab Goswami was being harassed, he was put in jail, he was being investigated in a cooked up case by the Maharashtra government. None of these organizations, whether it is the Press Council or the Editors Guild or the Press Club of India, they just kept quiet. In fact, their members were cheering from the sidelines. So you don't have, and as we all know, that the entire case has now fallen apart, and it has been found to be a fraudulent action by the government. Yet none of these organizations and none of the Indian media orgs, they had the gumption to stand up and take a stand, because at good, bad, ugly, he is one of your own.
Okay, so you're making the point that why didn't the same bodies stand for one of their own?
No, here everybody is coming out in defense of a foreign news organization which is being investigated for tax issues. I mean, let me also inform you and inform your viewers that there was a huge scandal in Britain not too long ago when the tax authorities of Britain investigated BBC and found that they were scamming the government of Britain. They were offloading employees as freelancers. They were paying into front companies opened by these freelance journalists so that BBC would not have to pay insurance tax. And it was as much as 12 million pounds.
Okay. Kanjan Gupta,
we don't take these things into account.
Kanjan Gupta, since you're talking
about... So was that also an attack on the BBC's editorial freedom?
Okay. Since you're essentially talking about non-compliance under transfer policing rules and these are tax surveys, I want to understand from you, sir, is the government looking at some kind of review of the BBC in general? Because there is the larger sense, as you have been highlighting, that the content that is being produced and disseminated by the BBC is anti-India.
I have a list of 60. I have with me right now, Maria, a list of 60 stories which the BBC has put out on, about, related to India. And each of the story is flawed. I mean, the facts are wrong, the bias is obvious, and the whole purpose is to attack the government. I mean, what has this government done to BBC for it to be so vicious? You look at the reports of BBC Hindi, the kind of stories they carry, the sort of language they use. It's all very fine to say that, oh, it's clickbait journalism. But why should we take it? And when I say why should we, I don't mean the government alone. I mean, rare is the media house which would come out openly in support of the government and any government. But nobody takes this kind of attitude. Nobody takes this kind of editorial position. I mean, let's not forget the BBC is a habitual offender. They had a documentary on Kashmir in which they used footage of Russian tanks in Chechnya to say that the government of India has deployed tanks in Kashmir to put down rebellion in Kashmir. And you want the government to take them seriously? I'm sorry, the government has no time for them. The government acted in the correct manner as far as the documentary was concerned. The CBDT is acting in a perfectly legal manner. It is following due process of law. It is a sovereign authority of the government, and they are perfectly at liberty to investigate tax issues. And once again, I will remind you, this is not the first time the BBC has got entangled in tax affairs. In 2009, 2010, also they were CBDT had asked them to revise their income tax returns because they had been found to have suppressed details. So it continues, and several notices have had no effect, and these notices precede the airing of the documentary.
Okay. Since you are trying to say that there's no link between the two, my last question to you is, because it's all of these developments are happening in the year that India has the G20 presidency, is the government sensing some larger design against these news?
No, I couldn't get your question, please.
Because this is the year of G20 presidency of India, is there some larger design to paint the government, its leaders like Prime Minister Modi, and that is the reason why these documentaries are being brought out by likes of BBC? Because even the articles that are published by New York Times, others, are very much seen as anti-India, that the India development story or the India growth story is often undermined.
Oh, well, you are right. I mean, and I think as the year progresses, and I use my words with great consideration, as the year progresses, White West media will get increasingly vicious. Now, you mentioned about BBC being a public broadcaster. Similarly, DW is the public broadcaster of Germany. It is paid for its operations by the government of Germany, which of course uses tax money to pay them. Now, if you see a series of reports starting early this year by DW, specifically targeting the government of India, specifically targeting the India growth story. In January, they put out a story predicting that 2023 will be a year of great Hindu-Muslim violence and bloodletting and bloodshed.
That's right.
They find one DJ in some village and they spin an entire story on how India is full of anti-Muslim music. I mean, this is the kind of reportage which is happening. Nobody has bothered to look at the finer details. The Financial Times has a story that unlike other countries, India does not have a digital payment system. I mean, it's the Financial Times.
Yes. And that's factually incorrect.
And it runs a story that India does not have a digital payment system where retail payments can be made digitally. Now, who is to stop them? If we sort of try and tell them that, look, this is wrong, all you people will stand up and say, oh, freedom of the press, freedom of the press. Freedom of the press does not mean you controvert the truth. Freedom of the press does not mean that you use your platform for biased propaganda.
All right.
Freedom of the press does not mean putting out fake news.
All right. Kanjan Gupta.
And definitely freedom of the press does not mean that you tag yourself to a global narrative building project to damn India.
Okay. Thank you so much for your time, Kanchan Gupta.